Hello class, this is lecture 12, the online lecture that is replacing the Monday class, which was going to be for all students. But we decided to cancel the physical presence and do this online presentation of performance assessment and personal communications assessment. So let's start with just a couple of slides that we used also last week where we asked the question, why collect evidence of student learning? And we decided that to make instructional decisions was the interim objective. We identified the fact that we could use assessment to motivate students. We could use assessment to encourage them, to help them see that they are learning, that there are aspects of the learning that they've mastered and they need to simply persevere to acquire the rest of the learning. So we encourage them to keep going and not just to give them a grade or to measure what they've done so that we can move on and teach something more or teach something else, but it is to give them hope and to help them understand that they can succeed. So we're looking at assessment in a very important and broad way. So today we're going to talk about two topics. The first one, performance assessment, has to do with how we measure a student's knowledge and skill using some kind of a project, a prompt, or a problem to solve. Then we'll talk about personal communications assessment, which is a range of assessments done in real time to determine what students need and what we can yet do to help them achieve what they need. So let's begin with performance assessment. Performance assessment will help us learn what students can do. Now, this is a little bit misleading because it's important to realize that all performance assessment incorporates or includes what students know. That is, you can't apply something or create something or do a performance of something unless you know something about what you're about to do. Excuse me. Pardon me. So we're going to talk about performance assessment as a way to assess knowledge and skill. The reason that performance assessment measures knowledge also is because it's impossible to observe a proficiency that a student is giving you without observing what they know about the topic in which the proficiency is embedded. And so knowledge and reasoning come along with performance assessment. So our learning targets for today are listed here. And the essence of the learning target is to be able to understand what a performance assessment is and create a valid one, and to be able to set up a performance assessment in a way that ensures that it's effective. So let's just start with this video on performance assessment. Now, be careful because it shows only secondary examples. We'll get to some elementary examples later. But it does punctuate the purpose and the effectiveness of performance assessment. So take a minute and watch this video.
They are dueling with robots in Florida and studying microorganisms in New York, designing future schools in Seattle, and racing electric cars in Hawaii. All across the country, students are being called upon to show what they know in challenging tests of their abilities.
Here we go, the national championship on the line.
These are the fun tests.
Today we're going to take SAT 1, the reasoning test.
But today's students face other kinds of exams, and their score on one of them can determine their future. With pressures mounting and stakes on the rise, some educators believe we are asking the wrong questions with standardized tests. There's an irony in testing in American schools. We probably have kids who are the most over-tested and under-examined of any kids in the world. Take New York State, for example. Even before they get to the Regents examinations, students will have taken 20 batteries of tests over the course of their school careers. So there are thousands and thousands of hours spent on taking these tests and preparing for these tests, which give very little indication of what kids can actually do in real-world situations.
People may be good test takers, but once you leave the world of testing, you have to think for yourself, because the world doesn't come organized in 4 choices, with the 4th one being none of the above.
As I was mulling all these issues about the SAT, I was struck by the fact that there are all sorts of other attributes like drive and grit and determination, ability to problem solve, communication skills, leadership skills, these intangibles that were critically important.
So we could get 120 points just for getting our robots in the end zone without scoring any balls.
And that by virtue of the excessive reliance on SAT scores, you're ruling out large numbers of youngsters of all races and all complexions who may not have stratospheric SAT scores, but who have these other kinds of attributes that experience shows contribute to high-level success in the real world.
Is this what the science wing would look like?
Teachers like Eva Reeder believe that measuring performance on projects is a better way to gauge a student's potential for real-world success.
Inviting area.
So instead of memorizing geometrical abstractions, her students spend the last 6 weeks of their sophomore year designing schools for the year 2050.
Why not have the whole site like wall open, be glass facing the water? To assess a student's deep understanding of a subject and their ability to apply a concept, you cannot test those kinds of abilities through a traditional paper and pencil kind of an assessment. It has to be what we call a performance-based assessment, and that's why I do these projects, because the project requires the students to create products or performances. In the beginning, we decided to start with the floor plans and the designs. Our school has one main building.
I have to come up with ways to assess those products and performances. So I look at the site plan, I look at the perspective drawing, I read the proposal, and I have a scoring guide developed for each one of those. But I think that the most powerful assessment for this project is that provided by the architects.
When I first saw your drawings, I thought to myself, this is a real consistent idea.
While performance-based assessment requires a significant investment of time and energy, proponents insist it is time well spent. The students have to develop the performances, the teachers have to evaluate them, but the time is not lost to teaching and learning. The time is teaching and learning. Because the actual conduct of the assessment is a learning experience for the students as well as the teacher. It informs teaching. It actually gives teachers feedback immediately about what they need to do to meet students' needs. So it's actually productive time. The Urban Academy in New York City is part of a consortium of 32 schools that has rejected tests like the state's Regents exam and replaced it with a series of performance assessments.
His thesis isn't clear. It seems as
I
though he
agree.
jumps.
We're very interested in students developing certain skills. We're interested in them developing an ability to work with multiple perspectives, to be able to analyze evidence, to be able to critique. We want them to be able to take text and talk about it, be able to understand how to compare different texts, and to read whole books, not just little snippets of books. And we set them up with an external assessor, someone who's agreed to spend an hour with that student, who's agreed to read the book, and who then sits down with that student and discusses that book for 45 minutes or an hour.
She's going to him to see whether or not he saw what she had done.
Right. What we're really trying to see is, can that student take that reading and go and talk to somebody that they don't know, a perfect stranger, about the book and have a conversation about it? That's one way that we can tell whether a student is ready to go on and do college-level work.
Is that about a 26? How come it's so low?
Critics of performance-based assessment worry that if students are free to pursue projects of their choice, standards will suffer. But some assessment experts say that independent study projects should meet the highest standards.
What we have to do is realize that even if we give the kid free rein to do really cool projects, it's still got to fit within the context of some objectives and some standards and some criteria that we bring to it.
For those of you
who aren't sure what alkaline pools are, they're
so that we can say by the end, I have evidence. I can make the case that you learned something substantial and significant that relates to school objectives.
As far as listening and speaking and writing, you're making steady progress.
One school, the Key Learning Community in Indianapolis, Indiana, has a clear and unique objective. Established in 1987, the school is dedicated to the cultivation of multiple intelligences and to developing new methods of assessment.
Ours represent that these are his strength areas, and also anytime you see the shape of a triangle, those also represent the strengths.
We're interested in how students apply knowledge, and so students are required through their high school to do major projects each semester. At the end of high school, they should have 8 major projects that they would have developed. But all of this is to be put together on a multimedia portfolio to document what it is they're capable of doing.
We've been working with the Egyptians, and because they had so many symbols and hieroglyphics. And
I think that what we're doing here is going to be needed very soon, because people are going to realize how short-sighted all of this effort on standardized tests is. It's going to crash. It has crashed in the past. It will crash, and people will need something else to replace it. And maybe we might help in that effort.
For schools that are challenging the high-stakes testing movement, the goal is to put less emphasis on cramming, drills, and test-taking strategies and focus on in-depth learning.
I'm all for high standards. I don't know of anybody who's for low standards. The question is, do we get at what we're saying we want using the test to drive this? That's the real crux of it. And I would argue that we don't.
A lot of teachers and administrators, in their understandable concern about these high-stakes tests, are making a mistake when they say teach to the test, that's what we have to do. There's no evidence to show that you raise test scores by teaching worse. There's no evidence to show that when you teach for an in-depth, robust performance where you have high-quality local assessment, that your test scores suffer. In fact, the evidence is to the contrary. High-quality local assessment is what we need to pay attention to.
For more.
So you can see from this analysis by educators that the idea of performance assessment has some robust properties to it. So let's ask some critical questions about performance assessment. When do we employ it? When do we use performance assessment? What's reasonable? Well, there's some interesting properties to it that have helped me. One is that not only can we measure content knowledge and reasoning skills, but we can also measure a student's disposition. How hard will someone work to produce a product or to perfect a performance that is representative of not only what they know and are able to do, but of their character and of their performance persistence, a skill that I think is highly valuable. You heard this mentioned in the video. So there are some things you can look at with your students with respect to performance assessment that you can't see from a paper pencil test alone. So here's a sample of some of the skills that we could measure. On the left side are some core curriculum objectives. And so you can measure language arts skills, you can measure science skills effectively with project-based and problem-based learning assessments housed inside of performances. Visual arts skills seem to be quite natural, places where performance assessment could be done, and mathematics skills. You can see the verbs there in all of these cases are performance oriented, and that makes it possible for us to measure all kinds of what we seemingly would perceive as academic skills as performances. When we talk about performances, we're talking about proficiency, the ability to do something well. There are some stunning resources available to you as a teacher. Marzano has produced proficiency scales, and I'll just highlight what's on this particular slide for you as you follow the cursor down here at the bottom. With a score of 0, it says even with help, there's no understanding of this particular standard. The standard you can see up here is objects and the materials they're made of have properties that can be used to describe and classify them. So we're talking about the principles of matter and energy. Well, even with help, there's no understanding at level 0. At level 1 now, with help, there's a partial understanding. So you begin to assess a student's status with respect to the topic of interest. So a proficiency scale is something you create about the proficiency or the performance that allows you to classify the student's performance in a way that lets you make decisions about what you should do next. At level 3, for example, you have basically proficiency measured. The student's able to select the appropriate tool and identify and classify the materials. But at level 4, you're able to add to level 3 the ability to go beyond what you had taught, to make new applications, to draw new inferences, and so forth. In the sample tasks column, that identifies some of the things that a teacher could do or have the student do to learn or to manifest learning through performances. Now, this proficiency scale that's on the screen now is one taken from Marzano's proficiency scale bank. And this proficiency scale bank is available at the URL listed there. You can search for it, Marzano's proficiency scales, and come to it. You have to log in, register and log in, but it's a free resource to teachers. And as you can see in this highlighted area that contains standards and Common Core objective assessment items designed to assess levels in the scale, in the proficiency scale, and they're created by teachers in school districts as well as Marzano's research laboratory. So this is an incredible resource for identifying proficiency levels, for looking at activities. As we mentioned back in this slide, you can see sample tasks and identify student performance based on proficiency levels. The usefulness of this particular tool, available free online, is pretty broad because you can use it to create your own rubrics, you can use it to create scoring guides for performance assessments, and so forth. And we're going to move now to just a couple of comments about rubric development. You've studied rubrics briefly in your online activities, and in your PLC, you're going to, if you haven't already done it, create one automated rubric using the UEN's resource, which I'll refer to in a minute. You're going to create one from scratch using that resource as well, just to practice creating rubrics. This is useful for you in a couple of weeks because in your assessment, in your performance assessment for Unit 3, we're going to ask you to create a performance assessment and a rubric by which it would be measured, the skill would be measured. So you can see the criteria here for a good rubric listed, and in order to define an effective rubric, the three main considerations are, first of all, you must be sure that the learning target is clear. That seems like an obvious statement, but if it's not clear, it's pretty tough to develop a rubric against. The second point is that we define the performance criteria carefully. So for the student, in order for the student to successfully complete the performance, you need to give them a pathway to that success by defining it. And you've seen some examples of that in the online activities where I've identified some performance assessment samples and some product assessment samples that show you where the criteria is described and what it looks like. The final thing is to develop a scoring guide, which is how points will be awarded based on the criteria. So the scoring guide, or a rubric, depending on how you want to describe it, is how you determine in advance what successful performance looks like, or when a student successfully meets criteria for the performance that you've established. So here's a rubric, for example, for solving math problems. And this one was created in the UEN rubric creation device that I logged in and did it. You have to log into this particular resource as well, but it's free. So there are two performances: understands the problem and uses the information with that understanding appropriately. And you can see the levels of the rubric: identifies special factors that influence the approach, explains why certain information is essential, and then downward to novice level. So this rubric is used to score the student's proficiency. So now here's one other example. This uses the 6-trait writing rubric, and this is actually available on the UEN site, so you can create it automatically using the rubric tool, and it just appears, the 6-trait writing rubric appears for you to use. You've already seen the PLC activity, so I won't say anything more about that. You'll just want to complete that activity. Bring samples of your rubric if you can get them printed off of the website. If not, maybe we can have you plug in your computers and show you samples, and show your samples in class. So that's just a little information about performance assessments and rubrics. Again, in the site, in the online activity, you've seen several samples of performance assessments provided there. Now we're going to talk about personal communications assessment for a few minutes. Now the learning targets for us are that we will understand that personal communications assessment is assessment while learning is going on, or it can be done as an interview or some kind of assessment after learning has taken place, but it is done in a personal way with students individually. And this just summarizes some of the uses of personal communication assessment. Okay, so now let's just take a look at some types of it. Personal communication assessment can be questioning while students are in the learning process. You could conference with them, have them come to your desk, interview them. You saw a sample of that in the online activities with the teacher who was interviewing her students about summarizing and assessing their understanding and taking them forward with some more ideas about how they could mature that understanding. You can do personal communications assessment in a class discussion, identifying students who are responding appropriately, who are engaging in the discussion, and making judgments about their level of understanding based on their engagement, and so forth. So we've talked about some methods in the online activity already, but the key is to think it through. Think about the things you're going to be doing during instruction. What do you want to know during instruction? And what questions could you ask, or what activities could you engage the students in that would reveal to you what they know and what they yet need to know? We call these probes, and so we're probing their understanding, we're probing their level of knowledge and their ability to articulate it. One of the things to remember when we're doing personal communications assessment is, especially in a group, is that we should always ask the question first. Now the reason we ask the question first and then call on someone to respond is that everyone is considering what their response might be before you call a name. The opposite of that would be to call a name first, in which case everyone else in the room relaxes and doesn't engage. They're just watching for that person to respond. So if you ask the question first, leave some time for them to ponder it, and then call on someone to respond, then you'll engage everyone in the thought process. You can do this another way by asking them to consider the question in pairs. Think about this question, now discuss it with each other, and then ask them to respond. So this continues to engage them. Another way is to call on people who are not volunteering. Those who volunteer are pretty confident they have the right answer. And so without even calling on them, you know something about what they know, but you know nothing about those who are not volunteering unless you call on them, so it's important to include them. wait time is crucial. When you call on someone, you want to remember Rosenthal's study of the 4 factors, where you give someone time to respond, you scaffold their responses, and you expect them to be successful, and when they are, you encourage them for their effort, and especially praise that effort. Or you scaffold them to a success response and then praise them for their hard work in coming to that success. So methods of personal communication assessment require some understanding of the finesse of when to ask a question, what kind of wait time, and how to scaffold students. I'll demonstrate this in class the next time we're together. So in this particular slide, we're talking about what target types would be the best types, and we're talking about knowledge, mastery, reasoning, proficiency, skills, product creation, and dispositions, or how they feel. And it turns out that all of the target types can be assessed with personal communications assessment efforts. Now, there is a validity issue with personal communications assessment. And you may have experienced this as a student yourself when you consider that it's a little risky emotionally to put yourself out there to respond to a question or to ask a question. And so you want to be alert to this risk and make sure that the environment of the classroom is open and it's very safe, and that there is no sort of accidental or unintentional punishment for students for either not responding or for responding incorrectly. Let me give you an example of this. If you responded to if you asked a student to answer a question and they did not know the answer to it, the temptation is, and you've seen this done lots of times, the temptation is for a teacher to call on another student to answer that question. When that happens, the other student is likely to answer it correctly because you're looking for someone who probably will get it correct. And when they answer it correctly, you'll praise them. So they get the feedback and the encouragement for responding to the prompt correctly, while the student who missed it is left in the dust without encouragement. So when that happens, the best way to handle a missed response, to handle a mistake, is for you to scaffold the student to either elements of a successful response or to the successful response in total, and then praise them, to not leave them until they have had a successful response, especially not to leave them to go to some other student to make the response because of the emotional hit that provides, that we can certainly avoid. Here are some examples of personal communication assessment strategies that can be used to teach, that can actually be used in instruction. I'll give you an example here, a simple little one with a music performance that these teachers have a range of learning targets regarding. So let me just launch this video and let you see personal communication assessment in action.
And Jennifer Larson team teach 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary. The students have made musical instruments.
You're going to form a band. Now you've all seen bands on TV, and you've heard what they sound like, and we're going to try to get you guys to sound just like them. And what you're going to do is you're going to work as a group, and when you get done working, you're going to come all together, and you're going to summarize everything that your group had to do.
In their cooperative groups, the students may not be making harmonious melody, but they are certainly sharing a learning experience they'll not soon forget.
What song are you playing? What song were you playing? You didn't know?
I was playing what she was playing.
You were playing what she was playing, and he was playing what he was playing. Were you guys playing what each other was playing?
Yeah.
You were playing Jingle Bells? And you were playing Rockabye Baby. And you're a band. I think that could be a problem, don't you think so?
Okay, ready, set, begin.
Within their groups and with coaching, the students coordinate their efforts and produce a better song,
So what song are you doing now?
Rockabye Baby, and when it comes to when the wind blows, I make the wind blow.
Oh, cool. I like it.
Now, how does that sound different than when you guys first tried playing? Okay, you guys did a certain rhythm. Good. What else did you do?
We just started playing, like,
So you weren't playing anything, were you? Just kind of making noise, right? What do you think, Ethan?
we were trying to set a goal on our rhythm and seeing which sounds made the right pitch for different words.
At the end of activity, the students write a summary of their problem and how they solved it.
I heard a lot of really good things going on today. I heard some people who actually were able to play a song. Some of you sang songs that you knew, and some of you were trying to make songs that were original songs, which can be a little bit difficult because sometimes what's in your head is different from what's in somebody else's head.
So what we've seen here is an example of a teacher just simply giving feedback, assessing on the fly, and giving additional instruction for how to bring this project home at the level that she had established as the criteria for success. So we end where we began. We talk about gathering evidence of skill and performance for the purpose of making instructional decisions that enable us to provide additional instruction as needed, which helps the student feel hope that we're on their side. We're going to walk with them until they have acquired the skills, including the knowledge that are embedded in those skills that we have intended for them to learn and that we have communicated to them with our learning targets that they should learn. So thank you for your time with this lecture. Please be safe over the weekend. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Maybe try out some of these skills on siblings or nieces or nephews, and it'd be fun to hear how it went if you should try some of these. But thank you, and we're finished.